Happy Death Day. All right, imagine this. It's the 1800s. No Wi-Fi, no therapy, no horror movies. And this one quiet Irishman is sitting in a candlelit room thinking, what if the real horror is your own mind slowly falling apart? Yeah, that dude was Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Before Dracula, before haunted doll movies, before creepy kids staring at walls for no reason, there was Le Fanu, the original architect of psychological horror. And trust me, this man didn't just write scary stories, he lived one. Le Fanu was born in 1814 in Dublin, Ireland. Religious family, strict household. His father was a churchman, so childhood vibes were less, go play outside, and more, have you reflected on sin today? He grew up surrounded by sermons about guilt, judgment, and the afterlife, which, honestly, is the perfect starter pack for a future horror writer. Add in Ireland's fog, ruins, and old ghost legends, and this man didn't need Netflix. He had atmosphere built in. He was smart, loved books, history, and old folklore. The kind of kid who would absolutely wander into an abandoned building just to see what the vibe is. And the vibe was always haunted. He goes to Trinity College, studies law, becomes a lawyer, and very quickly realizes, yeah, this ain't it. Courtrooms were boring. Legal paperwork? Instant sleep mode. But writing? That's where his brain lit up like a haunted chandelier. So instead of arguing legal cases, he starts writing stories about haunted houses, family curses, mysterious strangers, and people slowly losing their grip on reality. Basically, Victorian horror before horror was even a proper genre. Here's what made Le Fanu different. Other writers were out here like, boo, a monster jumped out. Le Fanu was like, what if you're not even sure if the monster is real, or if you're just mentally spiraling? He specialized in dread, not jump scares, anxiety, suspicion. That weird feeling you get when the house is too quiet and you swear you heard something upstairs. His stories would start normal. A regular house, a regular family. Then, slowly, quietly, things would feel off. People would get nervous, sleep badly, see things, question themselves. And before you knew it, the real horror wasn't a ghost. It was the mind breaking down. He basically invented the slow burn, the something is wrong but I can't prove it type of fear. The kind that crawls under your skin instead of jumping in your face. Things in his career start going well. He's publishing, gaining respect, building a name. Then real life hits him with the darkest plot twist. His wife, Susanna, becomes seriously ill, both mentally and physically. And back then, there was very little understanding, very little treatment, and almost no support. She suffered for years before passing away in 1858. Le Fanu was devastated. And this is where his writing changes. Before, his stories were spooky. After her death, they became emotionally haunted. More loneliness, more grief, more characters trapped in quiet houses with their own thoughts. You can feel the sadness in the walls of his stories. He didn't just write ghosts anymore. He wrote emotional isolation, the kind where the scariest thing in the room is your own mind replaying memories at 2 a.m. After his wife's death, Le Fanu becomes increasingly reclusive. He stays indoors, avoids social events, writes mostly at night. Picture him alone in a dim room, candle burning low, city quiet outside, and he's just there thinking up ways to gently ruin fictional people's lives with psychological terror. He becomes known as this pale, quiet, mysterious figure. Basically Victorian goth before goth was a thing. And during this period, he writes one of his most famous works, Carmilla. Now, Carmilla is a vampire story, but not the cape-wearing, castle-dwelling Dracula type. This is earlier. This is a female vampire. Quiet, seductive, emotionally manipulative, slowly draining the life out of a young woman while creating this eerie, intimate psychological tension. Le Fanu wrote this over 2 decades before Dracula was even published. So yeah, he was laying the vampire groundwork before it was mainstream. Put some respect on the blueprint. His influence runs deep. Writers like Bram Stoker grew up reading him. Haunted house stories? Unreliable narrators? Psychological horror where you're not sure what's real? That DNA traces back to Le Fanu. He proved horror didn't need giant monsters smashing through walls. Sometimes the scariest thing is guilt, isolation. Being alone with your thoughts in a quiet house where every little sound feels suspicious. He keeps writing steadily through his later years. Never flashy, never loud, just consistently delivering quiet, creeping dread. Then, in 1873, he dies in Dublin. No dramatic lightning strike, no theatrical final words, just a quiet ending. Fitting for a man whose horror was always subtle, personal, and internal. And like a lot of artists, his legend grows after he's gone. Later generations start looking back and realizing this man helped shape the entire direction of Gothic and psychological horror. Today, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu is remembered as a master of ghost stories, a pioneer of psychological horror, and one of the key figures who made fear more about the mind than monsters. He taught horror writers that sometimes you don't need blood or screaming. Sometimes all you need is a quiet room, a troubled mind, and the feeling that something isn't right, even if you can't prove it. So, next time you're watching a horror movie where someone says, "I think this house is watching me," just remember, some quiet Irish writer in the 1800s already planted that fear in our brains. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, master of dread, architect of slow-burn fear, the man who proved the mind can be more haunted than any graveyard. Sleep tight. Or don't. All right, that's game over on Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, the low-key horror OG who said, "Forget monsters, your own brain can do the job." Man turned quiet rooms into danger zones and made paranoia feel like a roommate that don't pay rent. He checked out on February 7th, 1873. But his spooky fingerprints still all over the horror game today. So if it's late, lights off, house too quiet, and your mind start whispering wild stuff, yeah, that's Le Fanu still haunting the culture. Happy Death Day. Subscribe for tomorrow's Death Day. And remember, death is guaranteed. History is optional.